Then she smiled. She reached for the buttons on her shirt. And before I could stop her, she ripped it open and screamed at the top of her lungs. "Madeline, what are you doing?" She scrambled to her feet, backing away from me, still screaming. I began to hear loud footsteps, and soon the class was filled with the students.
"He tried to touch me. He almost raped a high school student."
The moment those words left her lips, the entire class went silent. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. My mind screamed at me to say something, to defend myself, but before I could even process what was happening, a group of students surged forward. Hands grabbed my arms, shoving me toward the door.
"You sick bastard! I knew there was something off about him."
I was 27 when I started teaching at Westmore High, and I was already counting the days until I could leave. I thought teaching here would be a great opportunity, a way to gain experience, save up, and move on to something better. But on my first day, I realized exactly what kind of place Westmore was. It wasn't just that I was the only Indian teacher, it was that I wasn't wanted here. The students made that clear immediately. The first day I walked into my first class, ready to introduce myself, it took a different turn. Before I could say a word, someone in the back whispered loud enough for the whole room to hear.
"Great! A curry muncher!"
They all burst into laughter, making me feel so embarrassed. I tried to figure out who the culprit was, but the students were masters at hiding their guilt. No one would meet my eyes. I was frustrated. It was just my first day of teaching, and I was already having issues. But I let it go. I told myself it was just one comment, just one student. Hell, I was wrong. Every single day was a test, a game to them. How much could they do before I snapped? I had no idea. They left garbage on my desk, wrappers, crushed up chips, sometimes even spoiled food. My whiteboard markers would disappear, only to turn up later with the tips sliced off so they wouldn't work. One day, I walked into my classroom and saw massive writing sprawled across the board in red marker, which said, "Go back to your country." I was shocked. Regardless of my anger, I thought they were too young to be such racists. I turned to the students, waiting for someone to look guilty, to shift uncomfortably, to show the smallest hint of remorse. Nothing. They sat there, relaxed, smirking, waiting to see what I would do. I didn't want to pour my anger on them. I just wished one person admitted so I would have the chance to talk sense into them. I probably made a mistake by not speaking up there and then. Anyway, I wiped it off and started the lesson. Even in the middle of lessons, they would throw bald paper at me whenever I wasn't facing them. And if I looked, they would pretend as usual. It didn't stop there. When I walked through the hallways, students would cough into their hands and mutter slurs under their breath. I'd sit in the staff lounge, eating my lunch, and overhear students outside the door, mocking my accent. An accent I didn't even have. I mean, even though I looked purely Indian, I'd spent over half of my life in America. Before then, I'd lived in Italy for 5 years. So, I had no Indian accent. I wasn't ashamed of my original accent. Hell, I sometimes feel bad for not having it. But it was insane that they were mocking me for something I didn't have. Then there was the time I assigned a history project. When I was collecting the papers, one student handed me a blank sheet with just 3 words written in the middle. "Go back home." I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. But if the others were cruel, Madeline Sinclair was their queen. She didn't just make my life miserable, she enjoyed it. She was the devil herself. And every day I woke up, I prayed and hoped she would arrive a changed person. But of course, that was a dream that would never come true. She came into my class late every day. Whenever I call her out on it, she would smirk and lean against the door frame.
"Sorry, Mr. Sharma. I had important things to do. You wouldn't get it because the only important thing to you is dance."
The rest burst into laughter. Some even stood up and danced the way Indians did. It was so infuriating. While her minions did that, Madeline would be on her phone, pretending to not see everything happening. I tried taking her phone away once. She pulled it back before I could reach it.
"Are you even allowed to do that? What, do you think this is India? Take your stupid culture to your country. America isn't India, got it?"
And of course, she said all that using an Indian accent. I could swear she learned it. She sounded so local. She had time to learn the Indian accent, but never did any assignments. I ignored her and moved on with the lesson. But Madeline found new ways to push me every day. She'd lean back in her chair, raise her hand in the middle of a lecture, and cut me off before I could call on her.
Is it true that your people worship cows? Like, do you guys pray to McDonald's or something?
The class erupted in laughter. They always gave her reactions. I felt so angry and embarrassed, but I kept my expression blank and continued with the class. Another time, she faked a sneeze and immediately covered her nose.
Oh my God, I think I caught something from you. You don't think you gave me any Indian sickness, do you? I don't want to start dancing out of control.
She wiped her hands on her designer sweater and pulled out a bottle of hand sanitizer.
Sorry, just being careful. You know how dirty foreigners can be, especially you Indians. I hear India lacks toilets. I hope Donald Trump sends some money over there to help build toilets.
No one stopped her. No one told her to shut up. If anything, they followed her lead as always. One afternoon, I walked into my classroom and immediately smelled something strong and familiar. I didn't need to inhale too much to know that it was curry. I wondered who was eating curry until I reached my desk and saw that it was covered in curry. Thick, yellow, and dripping onto the floor. Laughter echoed around me. Phones were out, cameras recording, waiting for my reaction. I swallowed hard and turned around.
Oh no, Mr. Sharma. Is it too spicy for you?
More laughter sounded. I was so angry, but I reminded myself that they were kids, and I had to be calm. I spent my lunch break scrubbing my desk, the smell of turmeric and humiliation clinging to my skin. I thought about quitting. Every day, I thought about quitting. But I didn't. I didn't because I refused to let them win. I didn't because I told myself that things would get better. But I was wrong. Because Madeline wasn't done. Not even close. And what she did next just changed everything. Firstly, I noticed Madeline becoming quiet. For weeks, I watched in silence as she transformed before my eyes. The girl who once mocked me at every opportunity, the one who humiliated me in front of the entire class, had suddenly turned polite. It started with small things, a nod in the hallway, a quiet greeting. Then, she started actually participating in class. She turned in her assignments on time. She asked thoughtful questions, never interrupted me, and even told off a student who tried to crack a joke at my expense. I didn't know what to think. One afternoon, I finally asked, "Madeline, did you hit your head or something? You've been different lately."
I guess I just realized you didn't deserve all that crap. That's all.
That was it. No further explanation. And as strange as it was, her change affected the entire class. If Madeline wasn't making fun of me, no one else wanted to either. Slowly, the classroom shifted. The whispered slurs stopped. The laughter at my expense died down. For the first time since I started at Westmore, I felt like a real teacher. And for the first time, I felt like I actually belonged. I was happy and relieved. Because truth be told, I had been one bad day away from reporting everything to the headmistress. Unfortunately, Madeline hadn't changed. She was just preparing and waiting for the perfect moment to ruin my life. It happened on a quiet afternoon during break. I was alone in the classroom when the door suddenly creaked open. I looked up and saw Madeline. As she stepped inside, something about the way she moved set me on edge. I watched her as she came to sit on my table.
You have such a nice voice, Mr. William.
Excuse me?
It's so calming, so deep. I changed because of you. You know? You made me see things differently.
Get to the point. I'm busy. She walked around the desk, stepping into my space. Before I could react, she pressed her body against mine, her hands sliding up my arms.
I want you, Mr. William.
I'd never felt so scared. I grabbed her wrists and pushed her away. She stumbled, lost her balance, and crashed onto the floor. Get outside. For a split second, she looked up at me with wide, stunned eyes. Then she smiled. She reached for the buttons on her shirt. And before I could stop her, she ripped it open and screamed at the top of her lungs. "Madeline, what are you doing?" She scrambled to her feet, backing away from me, still screaming. I began to hear loud footsteps, and soon, the class was filled with the students.
He tried to touch me. He almost raped a high school student.
The moment those words left her lips, the entire class went silent. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. My mind screamed at me to say something, to defend myself, but before I could even process what was happening, a group of students surged forward. Hands grabbed my arms, shoving me toward the door.
You sick bastard! I knew there was something off about him.
I didn't do anything. Madeline's lying. But no one was listening. Their voices blurred together in a storm of accusations and disgust, pushing me through the crowded hallway toward the headmistress's office. Students peered out of classrooms as we passed, whispering and pointing. By the time we reached the office, my body was trembling with anger and fear. The headmistress, Mrs. Holloway, sat behind her desk, her normally stern expression replaced with shock as she took in the sight before her. She turned to Madeline, who was still crying tears that I knew were fake, and asked what the issue was.
He tried to touch me. I told him no, but he wouldn't stop. He grabbed me. He pushed me against the desk.
That's a damn lie. I never touched her. She came to me and I pushed her away. We continued going back and forth until Mrs. Holloway decided to speak.
William, I need you to leave the school for the day while we investigate this matter.
I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair. But I knew how this worked. A single accusation, and I was guilty in their eyes. So I left. They didn't call me back until the third day. The moment I stepped inside the main hall, I realized the entire school was gathered, including Madeline's parents.
Before we begin, I'd like to personally apologize to Mr. William. We have reviewed the security footage from the classroom. Not only was Mr. William innocent, but the footage also exposed months of harassment and bullying he has endured at the hands of his students.
I could see the shame on the students' faces.
As of today, Madeline Sinclair is expelled from Westmore High. Her actions were not only malicious but criminal. Falsely accusing someone of such a heinous act is unforgivable. And for you, her parents, I leave her future in your hands, but this school will not be part of it.
Madeline's mother breathed sharply, shaking her head in disbelief. Her father looked so angry. Madeline, for the first time since I had met her, looked genuinely afraid. But Mrs. Holloway wasn't done.
As for the students who participated in Mr. Williams' harassment, you will all be suspended for a full month.
Some of them gasped, some burst into tears. Mrs. Holloway ignored them.
And your disciplinary records will reflect your actions.
Some students looked like they wanted to protest, but they didn't. They knew they had no defense. Madeline didn't get a commendation letter. She didn't deserve one. With the report that documented everything she had done, I doubted any school would accept her. She had destroyed her own future. That wasn't enough. I filed a lawsuit for defamation, which I won. Madeline's parents were forced to pay me a huge amount and were so angry that they disowned her. I heard she now lives with her grandmother, who is a farmer, and forces her to work on the farm nonstop. As for me, my story gained a lot of attention. I was invited for interviews and even wrote a book, which became a bestseller. A tree is known by its fruit, not by its leaves. Thanks for watching.